Well, hello everyone, and here we are once again with another Tesol lesson. Today's lesson is language acquisition. Now, before we begin, I need to be somewhat clear and establish some preliminary information before we proceed. Now, you're looking at the lesson, language acquisition. Are you thinking, especially if you're a language teacher and a linguist, obviously, you're thinking, are you referring to first language acquisition or second language acquisition? Well, I'm simply referring to language acquisition in general. I'm going to start with a generalized idea of first language acquisition, and then as first language acquisition can be compared to second language acquisition. Now, frankly, there are a plethora of ideas and theories and hypotheses. Research has been done on how people acquire a language. There are researches and papers and books and reports and comments and theories about how a first language is different than a second language acquisition. Speaking of acquisition, there's also all kinds of discussion about the as I mentioned, similarities and differences between first and second language acquisition. Frankly, I'm not going there. What I simply want to do in these training videos is provide a foundational or just a basic practical understanding for teachers, language teachers, English language teachers specifically, so that they can hit the ground running with some idea of what they're doing and how people learn a language. I'm not trying to teach a university course that lasts a semester or a degree program that lasts 2 to 4 years. That's not my intention here. So you might be able to watch this video with some background knowledge that you have, and you might want to critique it. That's fine. Send me your comments. I always want to have continuous improvement. But if it's just to criticize, I don't really want to give much attention to that. Again, simplicity is the key. I'm all about keeping things simple because as people, we tend to make things a little more complicated than they need to be. So teachers don't need to know all of the differences between language, first language and second language, and they don't need to know about the different hypotheses initially. What teachers need to know is how they can practically help their learners in their classes as they teach the lesson. So I've given you a lot of preliminary information, or I've kind of set the ground rules or the tone of the lesson. Let's go ahead and begin. What is language acquisition? Now you think about that for just a moment. What does it mean when someone says language acquisition? Well, to just very simply state it, it's how a language learner picks up a language in order to use it in either the first or second target language environment. That's language acquisition in a nutshell. It's basically picking up the language. That's it. It doesn't happen, however, interestingly, through long hours of study. That doesn't give us language acquisition. Language acquisition is language in use. So, how do people acquire a language if they don't get it from long hours of study? That's going to be a shocker for some people. Well, how do they acquire a language? Well, let's start with first language. How do we learn our first language? We pick it up. Very simply, we pick it up. Starting as a child, as a baby, and in a crib, listening to the people coming, oh, hello, you're so cute, little baby, and then they're talking to you in kind of this cute baby type talk. The baby eventually picks it up. Mama says, "Dede, dede," or "baby bottle," whatever you as a mother say. I don't know, or whatever mothers might say. Or whatever toy. The baby eventually learns this and starts to try to produce the sound. And then eventually they, through the modeling of the adults or the people around them using the language, eventually the child turns into an infant, a toddler, and a small child who can start to put together language. Then they get together in groups of people in their same age, groups of children similar to them, and they're all working together, playing together, picking up the language from one another. Maybe one student, or excuse me, student, I'm so sorry. Maybe one child knows the word wood, another one knows the word bat. One says, "Oh, let me have the wood." And they don't say it so perfectly, but "Give me wood." And the other one says, "Oh, bat. Wood, bat, bat, wood." They're exchanging information. Eventually, I know that was kind of corny, but you get the idea, right? If you can make a better one, go right ahead. I'm on the fly right here, so it's kind of difficult for me to put it all together instantly. But they pick it up from one another. Eventually, their vocabulary expands, their grammar starts to become more complete. And of course, in an educational setting, they begin to receive the technical parts of the language from the teacher and the more formal ways of communicating. But in the end, children pick up their first language. It's through communicative experiences, both positive and negative, success and failure, successful or failed attempts at communication. What do I mean? They ask for something, they get it, successful. They ask for something, they don't get it, because the person didn't understand. They learn, wow, I need to change this around a little bit. So you think about how some of the things I'm saying might compare to a second language learner. And if you can speak more than one language, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You pick it up. Eventually you pick it up. Through use, through positive and negative interactions, you're able to, either with a teacher, if that's the environment you're limited to, or with the language culture that you are immersed in. So this is, I'm getting ahead of myself, but children don't think about nouns, and they don't think about verbs and subjects and objects and prepositions, etc. They just talk. Have you ever seen, I haven't, but have you ever seen a group of children getting together on the playground or around the neighborhood? You got about 5 or 6 sitting down, and then you have one up there writing in chalk on a building wall. Okay, this is the verb, this is the noun, the subject, and then the verb must have an object, and a preposition would help to explain more information or give more. Have you ever heard that? They don't do that. Children don't think about the technical aspects. They don't think about the code. They just use it. Why do they use it? Because they want desperately to interact with the world around them. Again, think about how some of the things I'm saying actually mirror second language acquisition. So children don't think about the technical things, of the technical aspects of the language. They just communicate. Just talk and talk and talk. And if they're not talking, something's wrong. So as a teacher, you might want to investigate that. Something might be wrong if it's a first language classroom. If it's a second language classroom, might be a little patient and understanding, because it could be what is known as a silent period, where the learner just needs a little time to get adjusted, to get acquainted with the language and the environment. All right, so hopefully you have an idea. Now, I like Stephen Krashen. I think he's got some very good ideas. I mentioned in previous videos, I subscribe to his monitor hypotheses. I just think he's got a good practical understanding of how people pick up a language, i.e. language acquisition, specifically second language acquisition. I call him the grandfather of ELT theories. I call him the grandfather of ESL. I think he's really done a lot for this industry, and if we could just stay with the basics, I think we'd do very well. But the research is out there showing us new things all the time. That's fine, but I think we're going to go eventually we're going to go full circle right back to the fundamentals. But that's neither here nor there. That's only my opinion. But I'm going to share with you something that he said. He said, the best methods are therefore those that supply comprehensible input in low anxiety situations containing messages that students really want to hear. These methods do not force early production in the second language, but allow students to produce when they are ready, recognizing that improvement comes from supplying communicative and comprehensible input and not from forcing and correcting production. Whew! What is that? That's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of information. It's kind of technical. Sometimes when you read things, it's like nothing sinks in. I'd like to just take a chance or take a chance to elaborate on what he's saying, kind of simplify it, not because you do not understand it, but because I like to simplify and make it more practical in the classroom. How do we apply this in the classroom? So let's start. Now, according to Krashen, this man has made an entire adult career out of linguistics. This man has done a lot of research. This man has done a lot of reading and lecturing and basically lifelong learning of how people learn language, specifically second language. So this comment, the best methods, carries weight. This is coming from a man with a lot of experience. He's got a PhD in linguistics. That doesn't always make the big difference because he's still a student. After he received his PhD is when he started really making the breakthroughs. But what I'm saying is over the past maybe 40 years, possibly even 50 years of his career, he's making this comment. The best methods, take note, are the best methods for, by the way, language acquisition. Okay, are therefore those that supply understandable input. In other words, the student can understand what is being presented to them. They're not being overwhelmed with vocabulary they don't know, or with a teacher speaking too fast, or with the grammar structures that they do not follow. They are able, in small steps, to understand and receive what it is that they're being exposed to. It could be in the classroom, it could be outside of the classroom. Outside of the classroom, they will not be able to understand every little conversation that native speakers have or English speakers have. But when it's broken down into comprehensible chunks or comprehensible chunks, then they begin to have improvement. Next, it should be in a low anxiety situation. We've already talked about the affective filter. A learner learns better when they're comfortable, when the anxiety is low. So again, as a teacher, we want to provide understandable input. We also want to provide a comfortable, and I like to say, a safe environment. That's an environment where the learner can make mistakes, quote-unquote mistakes. Really don't like that word. But they have some lapses in maybe pronunciation, vocabulary, grammar, and it's safe. The teacher doesn't lash out at them. The teacher doesn't embarrass them. They don't feel shame in front of their classmates. So this is a low anxiety situation. It should be a place where the learner is comfortable, and if they do something, say something that doesn't quite make sense, it's okay. The teacher will show them a better way. Okay? And it also contains messages that the students want to hear. Children, for example, don't want to talk about politics. They want to talk about the latest games. Adults don't want to talk about, in many cases, children's games. They want to talk about politics, finances, life. So you've got to pick and choose what you're going to present to your learners as well, or how you're going to blanket your grammar or vocabulary lesson today. As I said, as I mentioned, the adults don't want to hear about children's video games. So if you have a grammar lesson where you want to present the simple present tense and it's packaged in the children's video game context, they're not interested. They might get a little bit of the grammar, but it's really not interesting. It needs to be something that they're really going to get engaged into. Also, these methods do not force early production, simply meaning the teacher doesn't demand that the students stand up in front of the class and speak, or stand up from their chair and speak, or doesn't coerce the student, doesn't force the student, doesn't make the student feel uncomfortable, or even gives unnecessary attention to the student. You have a classroom of learners, and then one of them is maybe quiet, or one of them doesn't quite know how to say it, and then you focus all your attention on Juan over there on the left side of your classroom, and all eyes turn to Juan. We don't want to do that, right? So this is according to Krashen. Frankly, it's according to my own experience as well. It's just pretty much sensible information. I think experienced and perceptive, empathetic language teachers will understand these things as being true and accurate. Now, the methods will also allow students to produce when they're ready. In other words, leave the quiet ones alone. If you feel something needs to be said, don't do it in the middle of the class. Wait till after class, talk to the student privately, and see what's going on. Maybe the student's just not ready. They don't have enough input. And so, let them be. There's no need to embarrass a student. And improvement comes, now we're talking about improvement. These first few ideas were the methods of teaching. Now we're talking about improvement. Improvement's going to come from supplying communicative and comprehensible input. Again, remember the children? First language, they pick it up. Exactly. We need to provide those language learners, second language learners, with an opportunity to pick up the language through authentic communication or communicative activities. That's what we want to provide for them. And of course, comprehensible means it's still understandable. We can't be talking about or using vocabulary or grammar forms that is beyond the learners, well beyond, because it's going to be incomprehensible. Or even some topics are not quite culturally relevant to the learners, so we have to keep that in mind as well. And not from forcing, again, we encounter the word force. Teachers may tend to force learners or coerce them or try to lay a guilt trip on them to get them to start speaking, when that is really counterproductive, and it does cause the learners some stress. Now you're creating a high anxiety situation, or possibly, in other words, a high affective filter situation. So not much is really going to be input. And look at this one, again from an expert. Best methods for improvement. We don't want to overcorrect our learners. Some amount of feedback is necessary so that they can improve. If you remember, I have an analogy of sharpening a knife in my lessons, but overcorrecting is embarrassing. It's demotivating, and it does cause the students stress, because they might think, oh man, I'm terrible, I can't speak English at all. And so really what you're doing is counterproductive. We want to give them enough to kind of get them going, to show them the right path, but not overcorrect. Let the little things pass. Focus on the recurring, gross pronunciation, vocabulary, grammar issues. You don't have to hit or henpeck every little point, every little mistake or error that the student makes. Really, those words have negative connotations. It's not a crime to use grammar in a different way or to misuse a vocabulary item. It's just they didn't know. Okay, so again, Stephen Krashen, he knows what's going on. Now, there are other people out there who also know what's going on. They've done the research and they have some very great ideas. Again, I'm just using Stephen Krashen as an example, but I am certainly not trying to promote him as the all-knowing authority. Certainly use your own mind, use your own experiences, but you'll find that these ideas really do make sense. So, to kind of wrap it up, put it in a nutshell, the input is, hey, I understand this. Hey, this is interesting. Wow, this relates to me. It has something to do with me. I'm enjoying myself in this class. That's input. Gets processed, and at some point in the future, or even within the very same class, but possibly in the future in an interaction, it becomes successful output. So that's the idea. Input, by the way, can be anything that exposes the learner to the target language. Simple conversation, comic books, audio files, anything that is relevant and meaningful and interesting to the student, to the learner, in any packaging. Just, it needs to be something that they can understand, they can relate to, and it's interesting and meaningful. We're going to get a successful, I believe, a successful lesson. So that's all for our lesson today. And I would focus your attention on Krashen to review that. And also remember that language acquisition does not come from hours of study. It comes from interaction with one another or interaction in a language class. It comes through successful and negative exchanges. The negative exchanges actually help the learner to learn what works and what doesn't work. So it's okay. But don't be so harsh on your students. Remember, keep it comprehensible, keep it low stress, interesting, and don't be a terror teacher. They'll produce when they're ready. All right, so that's all for our lesson today. Thank you very much for your attention. Have a great class.